So this is a broken rod. Clean off. Where'd the tip go? Well, you're looking at it. I turned it into a state-of-the-art, custom graphite fishing rod fitted for Schwamigan Bay on Lake Superior ice fishing for lake trout this winter. I'm going to show you how I did it with budget in mind. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this, so it was more of a learning experience than anything else. So this guy was basically just a big experiment, but it turned out great. If I had to guess, if I had to put a label on it, this would probably be like a medium heavy rod here. Anyways, just to kind of look at what the features differ by and what makes an expensive rod expensive versus what makes a cheaper rod cheaper. Just kind of comparing, contrasting. The best budget-friendly and well-rounded rod that I found was the Clam Jason Mitchell Mackinac Big Fish Series ice rod, and I found that they had a couple of different options. They had a couple of spinning reel setups. They also had a couple of bait casting reel setups, and I looked at the pricing for the 40-inch heavy spinning reel. It was looking pretty good, $60 for a nice reel seat, the long handle, that heavy action that you probably will need when you're fishing those trout. It seems like a lower middle of the road price range option, which was the most attractive option for me right away. Also, Clam usually does a pretty good job with their ice fishing stuff, so for my first impression, it seemed like a great option. So as I kept trying to expand what I wanted to look for, the Frostbite USA Mr. Big 43H. This guy was $65. It looked great, and specifically the Twilight option here showed a nice cork reel seat. Also, it being a heavy 43-inch graphite option, it was pretty attractive right away. But $65. It's just going to keep on going up from here. They've got a good reputation. Their products seem like they're well regarded. I did a little bit of research. It seems like this one's on the lower high end. There are better options offered by Frostbite. This is just the one that I looked for, more budget friendly from Frostbite. Like I said, it's only up from here. I checked out Circle Tackle's Full Circle series. They have a nice the pike / lake trout / walleye rod, $75. A little bit on the shorter end. I was looking for something on the longer end preferably, so I passed on this one. The next rod I was looking at, so I found this Thorn Bros custom ice rod, and this was a graphite rod. This was a 42-inch Fuji with a Tennessee handle. Looks fantastic. I love the look of the Tennessee handle. It's used by professionals. I know that this is a reliable rod. I just don't think that $130 for a rod is acceptable for my level. If I was targeting lake trout near Canada, this would probably be more appropriate, but for my application, $130, not what I was looking for. The most expensive rod I found was a St. Croix custom ice rod. This one, it says ranges from 140 to 170. And so I was looking at a 42-inch heavy Apex Predator rod. That one was the $170 option, way out of my price range. So when the idea came to me that, hey, maybe I should use these old rod tips that are just stacking up in my dad's garage for free, and then just buying some of the separate components from Mudhole, and then just building it myself. But I picked out a couple that looked really good to me. And then I actually had to remove some of the eyelets that were closer to my base of the real blank because they got in the way of where I wanted to put the handle here. So I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little bit of a marking here where I had to remove an eyelet, and that was fairly straightforward. You can either burn it off, would not recommend it, smells terrible, or just take a box cutter and shave off bits of one end, and eventually you can just pull it straight off without much damage to the rod itself. As long as you're careful, it works just fine. Once I had a couple of those rod tips selected, all I had to do was run over to Mudhole, and I decided on the 5-inch cork handle, and that was just $10.49 before tax. For reel seats, here, let me show you. I just wanted to go with some graphite slip rings, and they're sold individually for like $2. Now, when I was looking at epoxy, I just picked up a couple of 2-ounce containers of the 2-part epoxy, and on the website you've got an option between 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and 128 ounce containers of the epoxies. Like, I'm just building a couple rods here. I just went with the smallest amount, and this should last me as long as I live. Granted, I don't get into rod building even more, which I might stay tuned. It was only like 13 bucks before tax. So total here, I don't want to do the math, but I have to. So let's head over to the table and I'll show you how I actually made this happen. I want to kick this off before I start saying that I am not anywhere near an expert at this. This is not a how-to video, and this is literally completely experimental. In no way am I endorsing this being a how-to video. If you learn something from this, that's on you, not on me. Anyways, now that that's cleared up, we've got these handles that I got from Mudhole. The first issue that I ran into was that these holes are way too small for these blanks that I have. As you can see, that won't fit in there even if I show you now. It's just, it doesn't go in. So I had to figure out how to make this hole bigger, and I looked back on Mudhole and found out, hey, there was a tool that I was supposed to get. It's called a reaming tool. I didn't get it, and I was already too far in. I didn't want to have to wait another week or so to get my reaming tool. I said, you know what, we're just gonna go to the hardware store and look around until we find something that I might like to use. So I eventually came across these puppies right here. It's literally just a chainsaw, like chain file. I've never heard of it before. I'm not a big chainsaw guy, but this worked just fine. It was like 8 bucks and I got it right away. I didn't have to wait for shipping, and it was at my hardware store, so most likely this will be as accessible as it is for me as it will be for you. I tried a couple of sizes in grits, if you may. I found out this longer one, I chose a little bit of a finer grit, does not work as well, and it actually traps, I don't know if you can see it, but it actually traps pieces of cork in the grit. So this is basically as smooth as it gets, and it will not sand the cork anymore. Not ideal. So when you're looking at these, if you do choose to go this budget slash accessibility route, go for the more aggressive grit if you can, because definitely avoid this. It's 8 bucks down the drain. This one works just fine. It's a little bit shorter. The grit is a little bit more aggressive. I can't remember the exact grit, but it was, I think, the most aggressive one that I found. So this one works just great. And all I do is stick it in the hole, apply pressure to the sides of the inside of the cork, and just go nice and slow and try to keep as much of a constant pressure on the inside of the cork as possible. And now when I tap it, a little bit of cork will fall out. Little by little, you'll eventually make it into a wide enough hole. This one I just got done with. I don't want to bore you with me grinding away at a cork for like 20 minutes, because this does take a while. Nowhere near as fast as the videos I've seen with the dudes using their reaming tool or one with like a drill. I tried using these drill bits. I found it to be a little bit more aggressive on the cork, and I was scared that I would actually just bust open the cork and really mess it up. So I rather take this friendlier way. A little bit more tedious, but it worked just fine. So once I got it wide enough for my rod, I just measured where I want to epoxy to. I want to epoxy to a little bit past where I'm putting the cork, and also so I can ensure that the very top of this handle gets properly epoxied in. And as a beginner, my sanding is not going to be as good as it could be, especially with these tools that aren't specifically made for the job. So in some parts of this handle, it's a little bit looser. So how I'm going to combat that is position a couple of rounds of masking or painter's tape. I found that painter's or masking works just fine. Just a couple of rounds where it's going to be loose when the final epoxy is on. And I'm just going to make a couple of circles to thicken up a little spot on the rod. That will help hold that epoxy in place in those looser areas. And hopefully that helps evenly distribute where the epoxy is going to be sitting once it finally cures. Now, when we're talking about doing the actual epoxy, when I was looking at Mudhole, they had like an option where you could buy a bunch of cups and popsicle sticks to like mix your epoxy and apply it to your rod. And that's just extra money I didn't want to spend. So a way I found out that you could avoid doing that is just taking some newspaper and using literally anything around the house to mix your epoxy on the paper and then apply it to your rod. I'm just going to be using this clothespin, and I'm just going to take it apart, and it'll work just fine as a mixer and an applier for the epoxy. And just like that. Perfect. So try not to make a mess. I'm going to take about equal parts of both part A and part B directly on to the paper. And to avoid cross-contamination, each part of this clothespin is going to be dedicated to each part. I don't know, you don't really make a PB&J sandwich and then stick the peanut butter knife into the jelly jar unless you're a psycho. Just a tiny bit more. Tiny bit more. Okay, that looks about right to me. Now I'm just going to take one of them, it doesn't really matter, and I'm going to mix this whole glob up. I probably used way too much, but I guess it doesn't really matter as long as I have a good, solid, thoroughly mixed and consistent and even product. It'll work just fine. This amount of epoxy will probably do like 2 to 3 rods worth of epoxying. Once I have it thoroughly mixed, which it looks like it about is right, let me give you a closer look. It's kind of a mix in between this darker color and then this white lighter color. It looks about perfectly mixed to me. So we're gonna just go ahead and get to the actual epoxying. If you can avoid it, try to keep it off your hands. I just stuck my finger into a pile of it. I'll have to wash that off later. So I'm gonna take my blank here and give it a quick wipe off with my shirt. Make sure there's no cork residue left on that blank. And I'm gonna apply the epoxy directly onto the area that I marked with tape all the way down to the base. And that might even be plenty. Just gonna spread it nice and evenly if possible. Make sure the whole area is as covered as I can get it. Right over that piece of tape that I put on there earlier. And this epoxy doesn't get hard for like, I think it says you have to apply within 15 minutes of mixing the two together. So there's absolutely no rush. There's some epoxies that you can get that are quick set. So like they will harden up within like 5 minutes of you mixing them together. I don't see the reason of getting that unless you're trying to do like a million rods at once. But for doing something at this scale, you can just go ahead and take your time like I am. Making sure it's as coated evenly and fully as possible. And I think that's about right. Leave that there. And when I'm putting the cork through the epoxy, I like to give it a nice twist and help the epoxy get into any cracks and crevices that might have been created when I was sanding out the inside of the handle. And doing it nice and slow as well. We don't want to just jam it through. And that tape's going to go in. And you can kind of see a little bit of excess building up on the end. Another kind of fun part about having this paper is that I can go ahead and just take that extra bit and dab it right clean off onto the paper. And as you can see, that's perfect. And I'm actually going to take some of the stuff I dabbed off and put it on the end here. Like I said, I'm not going to do a butt. I think I've suspected it just being a cosmetic thing and not really useful. And when I'm thinking about budget, I'm just going to save money and avoid any cosmetic additions if I can do that. If there are any real applications that changes the way my rod's going to behave with a butt on it, then I would start considering it, but to my knowledge, I don't think it really makes a difference. So that looks about right. That should be good, nice and even, and it's lined up with the, I just got epoxy all over my hand. Anyway, it's nice and lined up evenly with the handle, and I'm gonna grab a good glob. There goes the heater. Try to ignore it. Grab a good glob and apply it around the tip. That is way too much epoxy. Holy. Fill in this gap, kind of shove it in there. Make sure as much epoxy is filling up any free space inside the handle as possible. And then I'm gonna wipe a little bit of this super excessive epoxy. I'm gonna leave quite a bit on there though, just to help seal the whole cork in. Try to make it as smooth as possible. And it's getting a little bit tougher, for sure, but not extremely hard. And so that looks probably just about right. And before the epoxy starts settling, I'm gonna take this little mark off before it gets epoxied to the rod. We can set this aside for now. But any waste that was produced during this process, just throw it on your paper and then rip off whatever page that it was on. This works just great with magazines too. Any part of the paper that had epoxy on it, anything you want to crumple up with garbage, and this whole thing can just be crumpled up. None of the epoxy is going to seep through this paper, so if you're planning on reading this paper later, you still can, or burn it or use it for another rod or another application. It's still completely good, and it minimalizes the waste to a very compact and easily disposable chunk. And so just like that, we've epoxied this cork handle onto my blank, and we're gonna let it to sit a good couple of hours, and then it should be properly seated. I'm just gonna gently place it inside the vise here, try to keep it as level as I can, and we'll be back in a couple of hours once this is fully set. Okay, so it's the next day. It didn't actually cure in like a couple hours. The first time I did something like this, I kind of just epoxied it and then went to bed. So I don't know how long it actually took. So I just ended up leaving it overnight again. And it's about as hard as it's gonna get. Both sides look really good, nice and sealed. So now the last part that I have to do is just put a reel on there. And I'm gonna be putting this guy on here, the Abu Garcia Max SP20. It was cheap. If it doesn't work out, we can always take it off and put something else on later. But for the sake of right now, that's what we're gonna be doing. So this reel, I think it was about like $20 to $30, so it's pretty affordable. It's a 2000 size reel. I chose a little bit bigger because when you're doing lake trout and stuff, it's probably better if you do this with a little bit heavier tackle. That one I have set up with the 1000, but I also have braid on that. This one's gonna be fully mono because this will be primarily for set lines and a dead stick. So I wanted to have a little bit heavier or more line on the reel. So let's get after it. I'm just gonna try to find a good spot along the cork where I want to seat my reel. If I'm sticking this into a rod holder, I want to have a little bit extra handle available, but this rod actually has a pretty close eyelet. I'm worried about that line getting bunched up around the top of the reel when I'm reeling in, if it is going to be that close, so I might have to push it more down than I'd like. So I think that'll probably be the best that I could do, and that looks about right. So I'm just gonna take my thumbnail and make a little mark in the cork where I want to put some tape to help mark, and I'm gonna also make a little notch here with my thumbnail again just at the bottom of the reel, and that should give us two good indicators. You probably can't see it, but I can see it well enough. Just a little piece in the cork here, and then a little piece down here where I can throw some tape. So again, painters or masking tape works fine. And I'm gonna just completely cover this right in the middle of my marking, and that'll help protect the cork a little bit from the seats that I'll be putting on. Great. So we've got that marked off. Let's throw these seats on. So in the process of putting these slip rings on the rod, because I can't get it past this eyelet, it's too tall, and the cork end widens a little bit. I'm taking the same tool that I used to remount the cork, and I'm just sanding it down a little bit on the end, because I busted it up quite a bit, and I don't want it to look super ugly. So I'm just gonna do this quick. Okay, that's probably good. Now, I have these rings on. Now I just have to align my reel with the eyelets on my rod. So I marked the cork with my fingernail right in the middle of the tape. So I'm going to place my reel right in the middle of the tape, and then just grab it with the slip rings, and that'll kind of just help. And you can see how the rings will fully cover the tape. That's ideal. So whatever tension is on the rings right now, it's hitting the tape and not actually going to bust into the cork. So the tape will actually help protect the cork a little bit. Now I just have to line it up kind of from the top down and move it a little bit left and a little bit right until I find a good spot where my reel lines up well with my eyelets. Okay, I have it about as good as it'll get. Let me be really careful not to jar that loose, because right now it's only the seats and the tension between the seats and the reel base that's holding it in that position. But what I'm going to do is take electrical tape and just give it a good wrap around the whole deal on each ring. All right, that's not a bad job. That should be fully secured. I don't think that reel's going anywhere. There we go. Yeah, it's solid. Cool. And there we have it. We've just turned a broken rod tip into a fully functioning rod and reel combo. And we did it very, very, very budget friendly. So the whole rod itself, I think it was $26.50, $27, doesn't really matter. Then for the reel, if you kind of went with a budget option like I did, it shouldn't be more than $30. We're spending about $50 on this entire combo, and for that amount of money, this product should outcompete most rod and reel combos that are offered for $70+. And in my mind, that's a win. Also, I'm out here learning a new skill. But yeah, that's basically what I did to build my own rods, and I would totally try doing it yourself. It's a big money saver, and I think it was pretty enjoyable throughout the process. Using it is just a lot more fulfilling, figuring out how your rod behaves. It's a fun experiment, makes the ice fishing experience more enjoyable, and hopefully I'll make a couple videos, and hopefully you'll be able to see a couple of these rods actually in action and catching fish. So until then, see ya. Also, we hit 100 subscribers. I was gonna do a special, but for the past couple of months, school has been kind of running my life. Maybe sometime in the future we'll do a 100 subscriber video of some sort. I don't know how that's gonna turn out. Either way, no promises, but cool. Thanks for watching.